So here's our first video on the French Revolution. You received a PowerPoint to this in class. This is a little bit different because I turned it into a Google presentation, so hopefully the visuals will show up better on this video. For your left side, on the top, you want to divide it into 3 columns, and you're going to record the political, social, and economic causes of the revolution that you see and hear here. Now there's going to be a second part to do on the bottom part of the page, so halfway through I'll stop and tell you what to do there. So the French Revolution, as we've been learning in class, came about after the revolution of ideas, which would be the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. And the French Revolution was an example of putting these ideas into practice. And of course, it's a very extreme example. This revolution changed the political map of Europe. It was a model for later and unfortunately violent revolutions. And it brought the people of a nation to the forefront of politics instead of a monarch or some other sort of individual. Okay, so we've been learning about this in the video and the textbook, so hopefully this is a good supplement. So they're taking these enlightened ideals of liberty, that people have rights and people have sovereignty, and putting them into action. And sovereignty means that under the law, it's the people and representative government that have the power. And these ideas that all people are equal. And the best way for this to happen was if the people had a republic, as they saw the Americans achieve just a couple years later on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. So the background is you need to be aware of the social structure in France. There were 3 different estates or 3 different social classes. As you can see in this pyramid, right, the people on top had the most power and the most wealth, and the people on the bottom had the least. And you see there's inequality. And this political cartoon sort of shows how the top 2 estates were benefiting from all the hard work of the third estate. Now the clergy was the first estate. A little mistake here, I apologize. The clergy was only about 10,000 people. Some of them were poor and supported the revolution, but not much. And the clergy were church people, like say the priests and bishops. And the church owned about 10% of the land in France, and they were only about 0.5% of the population. Now the nobility, the fancy pants, they were maybe as much as 5% of the population, even that, though that says about 1.5%. They were about 400,000 people in France who were part of this nobility, and this was like the aristocracy. Now the third estate was the majority of the people, and that were basically everyone else. And there were some divisions within the third estate. The bourgeoisie was about 8% of the total population. They had about 20% of the total land, and they often exploited the peasants who were still members of the third estate. And the bourgeoisie were usually educated and wealthy, but they still did not have a say in running the country, which is important. And many of the bourgeoisie really, as educated people, believed in Enlightenment principles. But you still have about peasants, about 3 million of the people. Now, there's a financial crisis that strikes France, okay? Here's part 2. I want you to think, what would you do if you were Louis? What would King Louis do if there was a financial crisis in France? Just bullet a few points, okay? So this financial crisis strikes France. France was suffering from a bad economy. There were food shortages. They were building up debt. Think of what was going on in the American Revolution, how France helped them. They depended on loans that they couldn't pay off. The cost of Versailles cost a lot of money. France was going bankrupt. So what do we do, right? How do we correct this problem? So what happened was, as you know, hey, do we just stop spending all the money at Versailles? Not exactly. Hey, people, so France, excuse me. So King Louis calls a meeting, okay? So this is called a meeting of the Estates General. And he's going to say, we have to raise taxes because we're in debt and we're going bankrupt. But who is going to pay? Right now, the third estate paid all of the taxes. Should the other 2 start? Okay, so the representatives from all 3 estates met in 1789. This was the first time that the Estate General met since 1614. And back then, Each state had one vote. The first estate had a vote, the second estate, and the third estate. Now, after the Enlightenment, people thought, hey, maybe they'll find a new way to do this. But they didn't. They did it the same old way. And the third estate was really furious about that, because think about it. They were the majority of the population, yet they still only had one vote, like the nobility did and the clergy did, who was a small part of the population. So they got together and they declared this tennis court oath. And they said, this is not a representative government. And we're not going to disband until we change the government. We're going to write a new constitution. And about 570 people signed this in June of 1789. Actually, all but one of the people that met here signed this. And this was symbolic that people were now formally opposing the power of King Louis and the monarchy. And it was inspired a bit by the Declaration of Independence going on in America. So what they wrote was the destruction of the rights of the regime thinking the monarchy. And this was created at the end of August in 1789. And they wrote what is called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And this was outlining the rights of the people, and it proclaimed equal rights. So there's an image of that. You can see all the symbolic imagery, beyond the words there. Few other things going on here. Let's talk a little bit about Olympia du Gouget. She was a playwright, but who was politically involved. She was against slavery, but also she responded and say, hey, if we're going to do this the right way, and we're going to rip apart from the king and saying we're all equal, you best include females in this. And of course, she was executed. We can talk more about that in class. Now, the king conceded. He said, what do you mean you're going to write this declaration? I'm still the king. Say whatever you want. I still have the power. People didn't like this. Women protested in particular. They said, hey, we're starving. You have stockpiles of flour over in Versailles. And he gave in a little bit and went to Paris and gave them some flour so that they could feed their families. There were church reforms, which upset many traditional Catholics because they said, you know what, you can change our government and we'll support that. But keep our faith, keep our religion out of this. They didn't like the idea of electing priests, or they wanted the traditional way. But other people were like, hey, we're about representative government, we're about representative religion. So a lot of changes to be made between the religion and the calendar, as we saw in the video, and all those sorts of things. So we'll continue this next class. The password for today, as you saw in the photo in the beginning, is snow. We've been getting a lot of it lately, so it might as well be a password, S-N-O-W. Okay? If you have any questions on this, on the textbooks, and the videos you've been watching in class, make sure you write them down so you can ask me next class. Anything about the declarations or the causes, make sure you know this, okay? Because that's what the unit exam is going to be out. All right, so snow is the password, and as always, I'll see you next